Merry Christmas, written by USA Today bestselling author Lexy Timms, copyright 2023 by Lexy Timms, narrated by Kathleen Starr Hall. Chapter 12, December 12th. "Is your dad here?" she asked as Colson opened the door to let her in. The most polite greeting, but she'd been anxious all day at the prospect of having to meet his father. Her stomach had been in knots the entire drive up to the mansion. To her relief, Colson said, "Not yet. He still has some work to finish in the city, so it might be a few more days before he visits." "Okay, great. We still have time," she said. "Yeah." He shut the door and began to lead her across the foyer. "Guess we got pretty sidetracked over the last couple of days." Sidetracked was an understatement. Between finding out that it was his family who came up with the mistletoe tradition and then sharing an actual kiss beneath the blasted bush, Blair had neglected her job. Her job was the reason she was even spending so much time with him in the first place. She had completely lost sight of her responsibilities. Colson had tasked her with cataloging and selling his great-grandmother's antiques, an important mission that he had entrusted to her when he truly could have gone to one of the larger auction houses in Boston. Not to mention, she had given him a hard time about discounting her experience and treating her shop like a dumping ground for his family's stuff. She'd just be proving his initial lack of faith in her abilities if she didn't do a good job. Blair was determined to recommit to her responsibilities and show that he'd made the right choice to assign her. "Yes, we did get sidetracked," she agreed, keeping her voice casual, despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Though I did get to see the furniture in the basement, so that leaves all the items in the attic." "Right. Follow me." She trailed after him as he led her upstairs. Unlike the lower levels, the upper floors had very little furniture, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls, which probably meant that everything had been packed up for a potential sale. That made the already enormous mansion seem even bigger. Yet while much of the furniture was gone, the opulence was present in the well-preserved wallpaper, the hardwood and marble floors, and the chandeliers. Finally, they made it to the attic, and Colson switched on the lights. "Sorry about the dust," he said apologetically. "I wanted to clear out the attic, but I don't know much about keeping old furniture safe under those conditions." "Not a problem." She quickly reached into her bag and produced a pair of dust masks. "These should help." Once they had their masks on, Blair started to move through the attic, taking photos and scribbling notes onto the notepad attached to a clipboard. She'd come prepared to work today. There would be no more distractions. She'd be a total professional, responsible enough to resist Colson no matter how tempting he was. His broad shoulders and captivating green eyes weren't going to stop her this time. She was going to focus. Nothing would prevent her from cataloging everything, correctly pricing the items, and then coming up with a brilliant sales plan for the treasure trove inside the Bennett mansion. And it really was a treasure trove. There were sofas, sideboards, card tables, armoires, desks, and wine cabinets, which was just the beginning. None of that included the stoneware, glassware, silverware, and other assorted tableware that had been carefully packed away. There were also paintings, musical instruments, jewelry. Blair was certain that much of the delicate porcelain she discovered was from the 18th century. So was a lot of the furniture. Most of the items in the attic and the basement were the types of antiques that went to large auction houses, not little antique shops like hers. They were the exact sort of antiques she hadn't been able to get her hands on until now. Each item was something she would have given an arm and a leg to own, and yet she kept stealing glances at Colson as she worked. No matter how much she threw herself into the task, she was very aware of his presence, especially when he asked questions, taking in her answers with genuine interest. Even though she'd never been able to acquire such coveted items, Blair had been doing her homework for years. She'd been preparing for something like this, even though it had just seemed like a fanciful dream. Way out of reach for a small-town shop like hers. A reminder that everything about Colson seemed out of reach. From the wealth his family acquired to Colson himself, Blair felt that there was a distance between them that was now insurmountable. A distance that was due to their class differences. Differences she had deluded herself into believing didn't matter. But his father's influence had brought her back down to earth. With so many thoughts racing through her mind, Blair lost track of time as she surveyed the attic. It was only when Coulson asked her if she'd like to take a break that she snapped back to reality. Yes, I guess a break couldn't hurt, she said. Great, I'll get us some drinks, he said. After taking off their dust masks, they were soon back downstairs, with Blair quickly ducking out from under the mistletoe and settling in the living room while Coulson headed to the kitchen. He returned holding a tray of refreshments, including 2 glasses of apple cider. It's non-alcoholic, he said as he handed her one of the cider glasses. She accepted the glass mug gratefully, holding onto the handle as she took in the delicious scent of fragrant cinnamon, tart citrus, and crisp apple. The aroma of fruit and spices gave the room a cozy feel that added to its festive decorations. Oh, this is heavenly, she said, taking a sip of the warm cider. Is this an old family recipe? Coulson sat down across from her with a chuckle. Blair, I got this off the internet. She laughed. Well, nothing wrong with a Christmas tradition you found online. My family always serves champagne for Christmas, so I thought I'd try something different, he explained. Glad you like it. What did you drink as a child? She asked. It couldn't have been champagne. He paused to think. Hot chocolate that the servants made, I think. Now you have a new tradition, she said, lifting her glass. Toast? They clinked glasses and he smiled. We can toast to you and all your help. The cider had already warmed her, but she felt her cheeks get even hotter. I've hardly been much help, she said dismissively. You've been taking me on a tour of the town, and you're helping me with my great-grandmother's stuff. That's pretty helpful. He downed some of the cider. The hardware store barely counts as a tour, she said. You also took me skating, he reminded her. I did. She took another sip of the yummy cider, the hint of nutmeg and cloves invigorating her after hours of work. Still barely a tour. So that's a sign that there's more left on the tour itinerary, he said. I'd like to see more town traditions if you're up for it. She swallowed another sip of her drink, then anxiously chewed her lower lip. Even though your father doesn't approve. You sure it's just my father causing your hesitation? He asked. He definitely wasn't the kind of man to beat around the bush. Coulson knew how to get to the heart of things. A lot of it was arrogance, but she understood now that he wanted to face things head on whenever he had a question on his mind, a quality they both shared. Probably explained why they bickered sometimes. They were both probably too forthright for their own good at times. I don't want to be the reason there's tension between you and your family during the holidays, she admitted. This time of year is so special. I'd never be able to forgive myself if I ruined that for you. You could never ruin anything, he said gently, his gaze meeting hers. There was a tenderness in his eyes that surprised her. It warmed her heart. He really meant what he was saying. Oh, how tempting it would be to let his words sway her. But Coulson himself had essentially told her that nothing could come of this because his parents were never going to approve. That was a pressure that she well understood, and it wouldn't be right to make his life harder. It's Christmas, and your father is coming to visit. I want to respect that, she said, despite the pang of regret in her heart. It was the holidays. Her feelings weren't more important than a family's needs. Somehow, she'd find a way to get over Coulson. Somehow. The tour can count as business meetings, he suggested. There's nothing untoward about business, is there? No, there isn't, she conceded, deciding it was time to finally work out the details of their professional partnership. They'd spent the past several days getting close, to the detriment of everything else. Blair couldn't make that mistake again, so she was going to have to keep things on track. Clearing her throat, she set the glass down on the tray, ready to be professional. Time to talk money with the richest client she'd ever worked with. Speaking of which, we do actually need to talk business. Before Coulson could ask her exactly what she wanted to talk about, Blair had produced a pen and a notepad attached to a clipboard folded by a tablet. Where the hell had all that come from? They'd been having a normal conversation when she abruptly changed topic to work. Blair, this is supposed to be a break, he reminded her sternly. Why is it that every time I try to work, you throw me off track? She asked pointedly. He sensed that was a loaded question, because they both already knew the answer. Coulson liked distracting her from work because things could get personal once that happened. And personal led to everything from sharing a laugh with her to kissing her underneath the mistletoe, though he suspected that if he gave the real reason, he'd end up encouraging the very thing that they were both working to avoid. And Blair had been pretty firm about never repeating that kiss ever again. That meant that there were going to be boundaries now. "It's Christmas," he said. "I don't want to be the reason you overextend yourself during the holidays." "I'm not overextended," she said, waving him off with a flick of her hand. Coulson got the feeling that even if she was overworked, she'd never say. Another trait that they had in common, because he'd probably never say either. That sounded too much like complaining, and it was better to just get on with things instead of burdening other people with problems. "Okay, you wanted to talk business," he prompted, putting his glass down. Considering that his father had been breathing down his neck about work, business was the last topic that Coulson usually enjoyed talking about. But he liked talking to Blair. Liked talking to her so much that he'd settle on any topic as long as he got the chance to be in her presence. A very dangerous thing to want, since she'd sworn off ever kissing him again, and yet he thought about nothing else. When they'd gone skating together, it had taken all his willpower to ignore the voice in his head urging him to kiss her one more time. Her body had been so close, her mouth right there for the taking. Coulson had burned with so much heat that it had been enough to melt the ice. If only he'd tried to convince her that they didn't need to give in to his father's absurd demands. But the moment he'd brought up his father at the rink yesterday, Blair had started to pull away. Slowly at first, as she tried to get more details, and then she'd put a wall up. She didn't want to deal with his judgmental family, didn't want to jump through hoops to appease them, and she was completely right. Coulson would never have expected that from her either. He was more than ready to explore things with her, his father be damned, and he'd gone to the skating rink prepared to tell her as much. Yet, when he warned her about his father's prejudices, Blair had shut down any hopes of pursuing this spark between them. Clearly, she regretted the kiss so much that she refused to truly talk about it. Hence her desire to throw herself into work today, a useful way to avoid getting personal. Although she hadn't said as much, Coulson could sense her inner turmoil. Then she'd all but confirmed it a few minutes ago. She didn't want to pursue anything with him because it risked straining his relationship with his father. Over the past few days, Coulson had learned just how important family and traditions were to Blair. It was only natural for someone like her to take a step back if that meant Coulson might salvage this mess with his dad. Blair was doing what she thought was right, and he needed to respect that, even if it meant that he'd have to let things fizzle out, even if it meant he could no longer act on his attraction or his feelings for her. Problem was, while his head knew that he needed to maintain a distance, the rest of him wasn't willing to let her go that easily. Any excuse to spend time with her was enough for him. He'd just have to accept that all they could ever be to each other was friends at best, something that was killing him inside. "Yes, I wanted to talk business," she said, dragging him away from his thoughts. "Go ahead. I'm an open book if you have any questions," he said, relenting. If she was so resolved to talk business during her break, there was no point in arguing. "I haven't gotten the final price for the whole collection," she said. "My appraiser will give me the total figure in a few days." "But you have an idea, right?" She nodded, her expression turning very serious. "Yes, I suspect the collection in its entirety is going to be worth several $1,000,000. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being around $10 million. "Sounds great," he said. Her eyes widened. "That's all you have to say?" "Am I supposed to say something else?" "Coulson, I just told you that your family stands to make $10 million and you barely reacted," she said. "Well, the house is probably going to sell for a lot more than that," he said with a shrug. "Are you really selling the house?" she asked. "Yeah, Opal left it to me and there's no point keeping it," he said. "But there's so much history here," she said, sounding a little desperate. "This house has been in your family for over 100 years. Plus, the Bennetts have a connection to the region going back several centuries. Your father's side of the family started off as lumber traders, and then they branched out into architecture and construction. That's how they made their fortune. Some of them went on to become statesmen, abolitionists. One of them signed the Declaration of Independence, for crying out loud. One of your mother's ancestors was a general during the Revolutionary War." "You've been doing your research," he said, impressed. "Well, yes, I have to understand the family who owns the things I'm going to sell," she said. And there's a lot of information about your family out there. Articles, historical research, even a couple of books. You make us sound like we're related to John Adams or Benjamin Franklin or something, he said, laughing. We're known locally, but outside of the East Coast, very few people have heard of us. We're really not that important in the grand scheme of things. Her eyes went even wider. $10 million isn't important. So that was the issue. Money. While the amount had barely registered to him, to her it was undoubtedly a massive sum of money. Sometimes he forgot that money meant different things to different people. It's important, he conceded, just not the most important thing in the world. Yes, sometimes memories and family are more important, she said, which is why I can't believe you're selling this place. I can't hold on to it, he said. Why not, if money isn't an issue? Opal was the only member of the family who stayed in town, he said. Everybody went to Boston or Hartford or New York. We live in big cities now. The town is going to end up a distant memory in our family history. He could swear that momentary pain flashed in her brown eyes, but it was gone so quickly he couldn't be certain. But you must have some happy memories about the place, she said. I do. My family and I spent our summers here when I was a kid, he said. Those summers were the happiest time of my life. Being in this house, trading jokes with my great-grandmother, going fishing. See, this place is special to you. Do you really want to sell it? My memories will always be with me, he said. Her expression softened. The desperation vanished, and she seemed to relax. That sounds like something I would say. Have I been a bad influence? You can never be a bad influence, he said, granting her a smile. Any influence from you, Blair, will likely make a man better. Oh, her cheeks turned pink as she stared down at the glass on the tray. Although Colson hadn't intended to make her blush with his compliment, he did enjoy seeing the effect his words had on her. A lock of hair had escaped her bun, the golden color enhancing the pale blush rising in her cheeks. She was so incredibly beautiful that he had to force himself to tear his eyes from her so that he could form a response. You've already had an influence on me, he said, glancing over at the decorated Christmas tree by the window. He'd forgotten to turn the tree lights on, so he got up to plug the string of lights into the outlet. Scores of golden lights came on, the twinkling glow adding to the glow of the overhead bulbs in the living room. Have I? He returned to his seat, eyes trained on her face as he sat down. I think this is my first real Christmas, and I owe that to you. Your first real Christmas, she smiled. I know I'm too old to say that, he said with a chuckle. No one's too old to say that, she said gently. Better late than never, I guess, he agreed before taking another drink of cider. Anyway, as I said, the house is being sold, just like a lot of the furniture. Well, I'll be sad to see the place change hands, but this process is much more emotional for you and your family, she said. Colson felt his chest tighten as he considered how his family was going to feel about the sale. It'll be tough for me and some of my other relatives, but I doubt my father will care. I'm sorry to hear that, she said. He shrugged, trying to appear as casual as possible. The last thing he wanted to do was talk about his father at length and bring the mood down. Still need to talk business? He asked, steering the conversation back to the original topic. Right. We need to discuss my commission on the furniture sales, she said. We should talk numbers. Colson had been so enamored with her these past several days that he hadn't given much thought to the exact amount of money he expected to make from selling his great-grandmother's possessions. You'll obviously be getting a cut from each sale. Yes. Ordinarily, I'd buy each item outright, then sell it at a markup. But considering the size of the collection and the price of everything, I get it. He couldn't expect a small antique shop to afford pricey merchandise. That was the kind of thing museums or large auction houses could afford to do. But a small-town establishment needed a more equitable deal. A deal he was more than happy to extend, considering all the work that Blair was putting into this. Opal would have approved of your store handling everything. I'm flattered, she stopped to clear her throat. Our commission is 15% of the profits. Sounds great. Surprise flashed in her eyes. You've barely thought that over. It's fine, he said. Standard for a sale like this, right? Yes, but between the furniture and the house, you stand to make a great deal of money, she said. So do you, he pointed out. Her eyes widened at that. Yes, well, how do you feel about it? He asked. That's more than $1 million going to your store. Which is mere change for your family, she said. Like finding coins beneath the couch cushions. I asked how it makes you feel, Blair, he said. Oh, I'm fine, she said, her voice going up an octave to the most deceptively cheerful tone he'd heard out of her. No big deal. Other than my entire life, nothing is going to change at all. That's the spirit. Now you're making fun of me, she said, her lips twitching as though she was suppressing a smile. Is there anything I can do to make this easier? It's not your job to do that, she said. No, but this is a lot of money for you, he said. And that doesn't include the stress of taking on a project this big. Blair held up her hands, silently appealing for calm. More an appeal to herself than to him by the looks of it. This is a lot, but I can handle it. I've always wanted to do something big, and this is my opportunity. First, I need to draw up a contract. He nodded. That's the right idea. After that, I can get in touch with one of the local moving companies. Blair started listing off all the tasks she needed to complete, speaking out loud as she typed all the details to a notes app on her cell phone. As she rattled off a seemingly endless list, Coulson realized that he was probably out of his depth. Commercial real estate was a piece of cake compared to this. So easy by contrast that by the time she started to wind down, Coulson was impressed. After seeing her work up close, it was clear that he'd misjudged some things. Despite the fact that Blair's shop was small and out of the way, the place was in capable hands. He was beginning to understand that professionalism, knowledge, and passion could be assets on their own. Blair didn't need to be a big-name store with enormous brand recognition to succeed. We're definitely going to have to make additions to our website, she was saying as she shoved her phone back into her bag. Some listings on social media will help in the beginning, but I can overhaul the website once more money starts coming in. You've got it all figured out, he said with a smile. For some reason, he enjoyed watching her work. Maybe it was the way her nose scrunched up when she concentrated. Or was it the way her brown eyes lit up when she got excited? There's no time to waste. She picked up her bag and shot to her feet. If you're leaving by the end of the month, we have to get that contract finalized, especially around this time of year, which means I need a good night's sleep so that I can get up early tomorrow and hit the ground running. His smile vanished as he took in what she was saying. End of the month. That was all they had left together. A couple of weeks.